I fell into a deep sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, the bed dipped. Someone crawled into bed and pulled me into his embrace. It must be Ashton. I said nothing and went back to bed. I couldn't really sleep well the previous night, perhaps due to all the stress recently. When Elle arrived at the company, I felt muddled. Stacy entered my office with a few documents for me to sign. She poured me a glass of milk. "Miss Stovall, you look pale. Do you need to go to the hospital?" I shook my head. "I'm fine. I didn't sleep well last night. You should go back to work." Indeed, my sleep schedule was horrible recently. She gave me a concerned look and left with the files. Before leaving, she told me, "Do you want to see Dr. Crest? He's here today. I saw him in the elevator just now." Jared was obsessed with medical research. He was a shareholder in Fuller Corporation, but he rarely showed up. Ashton must be planning to invest in medical research. That was why he set up a research laboratory for Jared in the company. I gave a nod. Sure. My condition was horrible lately. I stood up and went to Jared's office. His office was on the same floor as Ashton's. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the moment I stepped out of the elevator, I immediately noticed Rebecca standing in Ashton's office. She was clad in a long and flowy white dress, her signature style. That was why I recognized her at once. Heading straight to Jared's office, I knocked on the door. "What is it?" A deep male voice sounded. It was Ashton. I recognized his voice at once. "Ash, I thought about it. I've decided to neither go abroad nor enter showbiz," declared Rebecca. She didn't seem delighted at all. He sounded quite uninterested. Jared didn't answer the door. I knocked a few more times. Was he asleep? "Joe will be here later. He'll give you a ride home," said Ashton coolly. His words might have upset Rebecca because she only replied after a long pause. "I have given up. Isn't that enough?" A heavy silence hung in the air before Ashton responded. "Rebecca, I told you not to make any decisions involving me. Scarlett is pregnant. If you insist on staying in J City, I will take care of you, but that doesn't include your love life. I have my own family." "Your family?" Rebecca shrilled. "What about me? My brother left me in your hands. Parker didn't ask me to marry you. Rebecca, we have separate lives." Ashton's reply was cruel. "Do you love her?" Rebecca asked in a trembling voice. "You don't. You think you're responsible for her because she's pregnant with your child. Ashton, you don't even know your feelings. What you have for Scarlett is a sense of responsibility, not love. Just like how you used to care for me. You felt responsible for me, too." I heard nothing after her exclamation. I thought it was the end of their conversation. As Jared didn't open his door, I was going to leave. Before I could do so, Rebecca's voice rang out again. "Ash, please let me stay by your side. I don't want anything else. I will listen to you. Please don't abandon me. I can't survive without you." Her plea was desperate and inferior. I lowered my gaze, feeling sorry for her. It was easy to lose oneself in love. "What are you doing here?" a male voice questioned. Snapping back to reality, I saw Jared walking out of his office tiredly. I was astounded. Was he really sleeping? "I am here for you," I replied. Before he could say anything, Rebecca's voice rang out again. "Ash, I know you don't love Scarlett. A loveless marriage will ruin you. You have a child, but it won't make you happy. Instead, it will become a gap between you both. You'll be forever tied to her because of the child." Jared heard her clearly, and raised a brow at me. Eavesdropping. I was speechless. No, afraid he wouldn't believe me, I added, "I need your help." "What is it?" he responded without looking at me. He was evidently engrossed in the ongoing conversation inside Ashton's office. I don't feel well these days. Can you find out if my child is affected? L asked. As he was still eavesdropping, my voice turned louder. Dr. Crest. He shot me a look and gestured for me to continue eavesdropping. Meanwhile, Rebecca was certain she was right. Sobbing, she continued, "You know Scarlett loves you, but you don't love her. After some time, she'll break down. This is not what a girl wants. Ms. Larson, you're not me. How would you know that's not what I want?" I couldn't hold back any longer. After all, Jared was listening to them as well. Stepping into Ashton's office, I shot Rebecca an icy glare. "Ms. Larson, even if my husband does not love me, we now have a child together. That means we're a true family. You might be clueless, but not all couples love each other." Both Rebecca and Ashton were shocked at my sudden appearance. She swiftly retorted, "Do you seriously think you can make him stay with your child?" I gave her a nod. "I wasn't sure if I could, but after seeing your reaction, I think I've succeeded. After all, my child and ill come first instead of you, Ms. Larson." Ashton's expression soured at my words. I ignored him and continued, "Of course, you're shameless enough to stay by his side. Perhaps after I've given birth, he might be bored at home and want to experience something different. By then, you will have the chance to provide him a fresh experience." PFT. Fits of laughter could be heard coming from the entrance. As it turned out, Joe and Nick were standing at the door. Stifling his laughter, Nick drawled out, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to eavesdrop on your conversation, but you were so loud." I couldn't stop myself from laughing. Joe glared at me, seemingly enraged. He went to Ashton and handed him a file. "You can have your own family, but you shouldn't have allowed someone like Scarlett to insult her." With that, he dragged Rebecca away. I stood in their way and stared at Joe icily. "Mr. Quinn, someone like me? What do you mean? You're selfish, despicable, and heartless." He replied immediately. Nodding, I flashed a mocking smile. "Thank you for your detailed answer. Then what is the woman you fancy like?" Ignoring their expressions, I added with a grin, "Once a bitch, forever a bitch. Ms. Larson might seem nice enough to make you forget she's a homewrecker. But the truth is, she has forced the wife to abort her baby and framed someone for possessing drugs. Are her actions forgivable because she looks delicate and weak?" "Scarlett, stop spouting nonsense," Rebecca blurted out angrily. I cocked my eyebrows at her. "Desperate much? Enough." Ashton finally spoke up. He glanced at Joe and ordered him, "Send her back home. Don't let her come here again." Joe was about to say something, but Jared cut him off. "Joe, when you're back later, come to my office. I have something for your father. It's for his rheumatism." At the same time, Nick looked at Ashton and asked, "Mr. Fuller, are you free now? Let's talk." Joe had nothing else to say. He glowered at me and left with Rebecca. I said to Jared, "I need to talk to you." I really did. Nodding, he said, "Let's go to my office." In his office, I sat down and sighed tiredly. I have been suffering from dizzy spells recently. My shoulders and spine feel awful. He went to his seat and began running checks. After a while, he returned with my diagnosis. "Well, it looks like your dizziness is the result of you staying up late. You should refrain from doing that and rest earlier. Besides, there are signs of depression due to stress. You should lighten up and keep a good mood." Resting my chin on my hand, I informed him, "I am going on a business trip to a city. Is there any sleeping pill I can bring along?" "Yes, but they are not good for your baby," he replied. "You shouldn't rely on them. I murmured in assent. If this kept going on, I wasn't even sure whether I could pull through, let alone the baby. When I stepped out of Jared's office, I nearly bumped into Ashton, who seemed terribly upset. I wasn't feeling well, so Elle couldn't be bothered to talk to him. He grabbed my hand when I brushed past him. "What's wrong with you?" he asked in his deep voice. "I am still alive." I pulled away from him in irritation and stepped into the elevator. Back at my office, Stacy placed a stack of files on my desk. "Ms. Stovall, these are the reports of Fuller Corporation's audit. Please read through and sign your name." I nodded and inquired, "What about AC? The auditing process for Quinn Corporation might take some time." It's going smoothly." I started flipping through the documents. Suddenly, I recalled I was supposed to go on a business trip tomorrow. Looking up, I asked, "What time is my flight to a city tomorrow?" 5 a.m. After a brief pause, Stacy added, "We plan to wrap up things in a city in 2 days, so we should head there as early as possible. A representative from Harrison Credit will also come along." "Okay," I replied. "Elle can go by myself. You should stay here to assist Harrison Credit and AC." "Sure." The rainy season in J City shrouded the city in the gloom. Yesterday, the sun was up for a few hours before it started pouring again. At 5 p.m., I finally finished reading the documents. My eyes were dry, so I told Stacy to help me buy some eye drops. After wrapping up my daily report, it was already 6 p.m. My stomach was growling in hunger by now. I switched off my laptop and headed downstairs. It was time to get off work, so the employees were all exiting the building. They greeted me politely as I made my way out. I forced out a smile and scurried out. There was a KFC right next to our building, so I entered and ordered a meal for one. When I was waiting for my order to be prepared, a few young ladies greeted me. Shyly, "Ms. Stovall, what a coincidence." I nodded politely. I racked my brains, but couldn't remember who the girls were. A professional-looking young lady said, "Ms. Stovall, I'm Isabel Leake from the Electronic Design Department." I was startled. Her words reminded me of who they were. As I was in charge of high-tech's case now, I would occasionally pop to the design department. No wonder they recognized me. Fuller Corporation was too large a company. In J City alone, it had a few thousand employees. We all worked in the same building, but we'd only see the same few colleagues every day. Smiling faintly, I greeted the young ladies and left with my fried chicken. LZZY. I didn't know the higher-ups eat fried chicken like us. The higher-ups are human beings too. Why can't they eat fried chicken? Their annual salary is several times more than ours. I thought they'd eat something better. I left the restaurant and didn't hear the rest of their conversation. Men would never be satisfied with what they had. When one was poor, one would work hard to earn money. But when one got rich, one would wallow in love. After spending the whole day working tirelessly, I entered the car and began chomping on my fried chicken. A car honked in my direction, so I wound down the window. A black Maybach was parked right beside my vehicle. The only black Maybach I knew was parked in the villa's garage. Even if my friends were rich enough to afford this car, it was too flashy to drive it around daily. I couldn't recall who else had this car, so I thought it was a stranger and wound up my car window. Suddenly, the Maybach's window rolled down, revealing Nick's cheeky face. "Hey, gorgeous. Wanna have dinner together?" How childish. I rolled my eyes at him and showed him my fried chicken. "I am sorry, but I'll have eaten." Frowning, he poked his head out. "You are pregnant. How could you eat this? Is Ashton mistreating you?" Elle ignored his remark. After clearing up the trash, I started the engine and prepared to head home. He parked his car right in front of mine, blocking my way out. Scarlett, come on. Let's have dinner together. I was annoyed by him. I am full. Then spend some time with me. What was his problem? As his car stopped in the middle of the lane, I wasn't the only one who got stuck. No one else could leave. The other cars started honking at him, but he merely gazed at me. Cheekily, I put a hand to my forehead in irritation. Fine. Lead the way. Arching a brow, he announced, let me drive you there. You shouldn't drive as you're pregnant. Damn it. I alighted from my car and went to his car, taking the passenger seat. Will you leave now? I asked coldly. Grinning, he replied, of course. Let's go. Young men like him were ostentatious. He was driving a flashy car, and instead of keeping a low profile, he opened the convertible top in the middle of the city. He was seriously childish. The wind felt chilly, but I didn't say anything. He could do whatever he wanted. Scarlett, do you think we'll show up in the gossip column of J-City's news tomorrow? He yelled over the rock music playing on his radio. I rolled my eyes and ignored him. If we appeared in the gossip column, it would be his fault. His car came to a stop in a bustling section of the city. It was somewhere all the young people liked to hang out. Both he and his car were ostentatious. The moment the car rolled to a stop, young ladies stared and tittered while young men took photos of his car enviously. Tacky, I commented and got off his car. Looking around, I inquired, what do you want for dinner? He responded with a smirk, you decide. After surveying the available restaurants, I entered a French restaurant without hesitation. Nick trailed behind me and teased, Scarlett, you're quite the romantic. I couldn't be bothered to reply. I had chosen this restaurant because I didn't want to be ogled by others. Inside, the server greeted us, table for two. We have a couple set today. Would you like to order that? Sure, well take that, and a bottle of wine, please. Nick ordered without thinking much. I looked at the server and said, I would like a glass of fruit juice, please. After the server left, Nick grinned at me. Scarlett, I forgot you can't drink alcohol. He was doing it on purpose. I stared at my phone as Ashton had just sent me a text. Where are you? What a brief message. I didn't reply and locked my phone. Nick was gazing at me, so I furrowed my brows. What is it? Scarlett, has anyone ever told you that you look like a celebrity? The server was serving our steak when Nick asked. I thanked the server before answering, who? Surprised I acknowledge him. He straightened his back and replied in all seriousness. Angelina Jolie. I nodded. Yes. I used to get that a lot in university. My friends used to say that, but after I wore glasses, I rarely hear that anymore. As I seemed arty with glasses, I no longer resembled her. Also, you resemble another person I know, he said in all seriousness. I sliced my steak, thinking he was bored and trying to strike up a conversation. I replied and focused on my steak. He didn't eat his food. Instead, he swirled his wine and commented, you resemble my mother, especially your eyes. Both of you have similar eyes. He was annoying me at that point. Stuffing a piece of steak into my mouth, I glared at him. I guess I have one of those faces. Someone told me I resembled Rebecca too. George used to comment on how much I looked like Rebecca back then. However, I never felt that way. After all, many people had similar brows and eyes. We probably had the same ancestors a few centuries ago. He pouted and downed his wine. Why did you transfer away from N University back then? I was stunned by his question. It was ages ago. How did he know about this? Putting my utensils down, I looked at him. Were we university mates? Raising a brow, he refilled his glass before retorting, "You don't remember me." I shook my head. I only remembered seeing him after taking over Fuller Corporation's audit. That was it. He shrugged and said nothing else. "Never mind. Just remember me from now on," he concluded. We chatted briefly. Throughout the whole exchange, he ate nothing and finished the bottle of wine. After emptying the wine, he sprawled on the table and stared at me blankly. As it was getting late, I went to pay the bill. I was afraid I might oversleep tomorrow if I were to sleep late tonight. Coincidentally, we bumped into Nick's mother Cameron, and Rebecca here. Bumping into Cameron wasn't strange, nor was bumping into Rebecca. But I was surprised to see them both together. I didn't think Rebecca and Cameron knew each other, did they? I watched as they linked hands and shopped together happily like mother and daughter from a distance. After paying the bill, I returned to Nick. His cheeks were flushed, so he must be drunk. "Can you walk?" Elle asked. "No," he replied petulantly. Sighing, I took my bag and helped him out of the restaurant. A while ago, Nick had entered elegantly. Now, he was exiting the restaurant clumsily. I placed him in the passenger seat and started the engine. As his sports car was too low, I couldn't really drive comfortably. I was too used to driving my Cadillac. Luckily, there weren't many cars on the road. I didn't get into any mishap. I wanted to send him back to Pear Garden. Ashton and I had been there once, but he refused to let me send him back there. It took me some effort before he revealed he was staying at Peakville Estate alone. I was surprised to find out he was staying in the same residential area as us. "Scarlett, don't you remember me?" Halfway home, he suddenly muttered. I shook my head. "Do we know each other?" He let out a bitter chuckle. "Am I the only one who remembers the mulberry tree in Winona's yard, the flowers on the riverbank, and you with a snotty nose?" At his words, my mind started wandering. How did he know about this? Soon, we arrived at Peakville Estate. I helped him down when we reached his house. It took a while for someone to answer the door, and it was a senior. When he saw how drunk Nick was, he exclaimed, "Oh, Nick. Why are you so drunk? Thank you for bringing him home." I smiled politely and left Nick with him. I wanted to walk back home, but Peakville Estate was a large residential area. Every villa had its own compound, so it would take me a long time to reach home. Hence, I drove Nick's car back home. It was already midnight when I reached home. As I had to wake up early tomorrow, I parked the car downstairs. After that, I prepared to wash up before going to bed. Alas, I saw Ashton waiting outside the door with a flickering cigarette between his fingers. Frowning, I wondered why he was suddenly smoking outside. At the sight of me, he put out his cigarette and glared at me. "Where have you been?" "I had dinner with a friend." I brushed past him and entered the villa. He pulled my hand and brought me into his arms. The heavy stench of cigarette smoke burned my lungs. "Ashton, who did you have dinner with? Did you drink wine even though you are pregnant?" He rasped. The alcohol stench must be from Nick. I felt uncomfortable in his arms, so I shoved him away. I didn't drink any wine. All Elle wanted was to sleep, but Ashton refused to back off. He pulled me to the Maybach and demanded, "This is a limited edition model. Scarlett, you found your next target, huh? What the fuck?" I nearly cursed out loud and pushed him away. At his dejected expression, my anger heightened. "Ashton, please don't judge me with that narrow mindset of yours. I'm not you, who has plenty of backups waiting for you." With that, I spun on my heels and returned to the bedroom. After locking the door, I washed up and went to bed. I fell asleep in no time. It wasn't until my phone started ringing incessantly that I got woken up rudely. In a daze, I stared at the ceiling blankly when my phone rang again. I was about to answer when the person hung up. I wanted to go back to bed. However, it suddenly occurred to me that I was supposed to go on a business trip. I sat up abruptly as my sleepiness faded away. "What's wrong?" a hoarse voice rang out by my side. Stunned, I swiveled around and saw Ashton going back to sleep. His arm was around my waist. How did he? Didn't I lock the door? Ah, after he kicked the door open back then, he must have prepared a spare. I pried his hand off and took my phone. It had stopped ringing by now. Ashton must have been disturbed by it and switched it off. After switching it on, a call came in. I answered. "Hello, Ms. Stovall, our flight is at 5 a.m. Shouldn't you be prepared to go to the airport by now?" Hearing Nick's voice, I frowned as I inquired, "You're going on the business trip with me?" Stacy told me about a representative from Harrison Credit would be coming along with me, but she didn't specify who it was. Get ready and pick me up. You drove my car away last night." Glancing at the clock, I realized it was only 4 a.m. I couldn't help but admire Nick's professionalism. How could he wake up this early when he was in a drunken state just a few hours ago? After hanging up, I packed up hurriedly and left with my luggage. When I reached Nick's house, he was yawning sleepily, his hair a messy nest. Coming to me, he said, "I will drive." There was no way I'd risk letting him drive. I'll drive. Peakville Estate was nearby the airport. Traffic was smooth, so we reached in less than half an hour. Luckily, the queue was short. We got our boarding passes in no time and boarded the plane. Once we settled in, Nick got a blanket and promptly fell asleep. It was a 3-hour flight from J City to a city, so I had some sleep, too. When I woke up, Nick was already freshened up. He told me, "We'll be heading to the branch office to work first. Then, let's go back to the hotel to get some sleep." Those words sounded weird coming out from him. I didn't think much and followed him out of the plane in a daze. The branch office sent a car to pick us up, so we arrived there shortly. As a branch company, the operating model was more or less the same as Fuller Corporation. Once we arrived, the president of the branch office, Howard Wrangler, chatted with us briefly. We contacted the finance department and other relevant departments for a brief meeting. Then, Nick received the relevant documents from them. We left the branch office shortly after. I glanced at the files in his arms and asked, "Aren't you going to work in their office?" "Not here," he replied. "Elle ordered food to be delivered to our room. You can rest after you eat." I was startled by his attentiveness. Nevertheless, I gave him a nod. Our rooms were booked earlier. The bellboy brought us to our room and said, "Your meal has been delivered. If you need anything else, please call the front desk." Although we booked 2 rooms, for our convenience, the lunch was sent to Nick's room. We thanked the bellboy and entered the room. We had an early flight and immediately started working upon arrival. I was exhausted and hungry after a few hours. Elle ate my share and got up, preparing to leave the room to Nick. He looked at me and said, "You can rest here. I will leave after a while." As he was still eating, I nodded in acknowledgement. The room was a suite, where the living room and bedroom were separated. Elle entered the bedroom and switched on the air conditioner. Plopping on the bed, the last thought I had before falling asleep was to take a shower after Nick left. When I jolted awake again, there was a blanket covering my body. I could hear someone flipping through files in the living room. Stunned, I jumped up and walked out of the room. Nick was sitting on the sofa, flipping through the files and typing on his laptop occasionally. It seemed like he had been dealing with work the entire afternoon. It was unhealthy to sleep right after a meal. I sat on the bed for a while with a bloated stomach. After a long while, I exited the bedroom. Nick was sprawled on the table, engrossed in a document. He didn't seem to notice I was awakened. I poured a cup of water for him. "Why don't you take a break?" He looked up and nodded, seemingly in a daze. After taking a sip of the water, his gaze cleared. "You're awake." I gave him a slight nod. Judging from the report on his laptop, I had to admit he was bold and efficient at work. He soon finished the report and snapped his laptop shut. Leaning back on the sofa, he massaged his temples and shut his eyes. "Mr. Wrangler called earlier. He said he wants to buy you dinner later," he uttered in exhaustion. "Okay," I replied. "Why don't you take a nap in the room?" Glancing at his watch, he shook his head. "It's all right." He paused briefly before adding, "The financial report for the branch office isn't right. I wouldn't have found out about it if I hadn't looked closely. I think a manager embezzled the funds and made up a project to fool everyone else. A few million were gone. Take a look for yourself." I opened the accounts and read them carefully. The branch office was operated based on Fuller Corporation's operating model. As it was doing well in a city, Ashton gave the president a lot of power. He rarely interfered in the business decisions here. I scanned the accounts and realized a construction project that seemed odd. In usual circumstances, a minor construction site accident wouldn't cost millions. Even if they had to compensate the injured staff, it wouldn't cost that much. Obviously, someone had ripped us off. "I think we need Howard to deal with this," I spoke, looking up at Nick. To my surprise, he was already asleep. Getting to my feet, I went to the bedroom and got the blanket and put it over him. We had 2 hours left until the next schedule. He could get some shut-eye before that. After all, we got home late last night. I received a call from Macy after I sorted everything out. When I answered her call, I could hear she was in a noisy setting. "Scarlett, I'm in a city. Send your location to me. I will be there later." "Oh, you're in a city, too?" I questioned in astonishment. "Didn't she says she'll be traveling in each city? Why was she in a city all of a sudden?" "I saw your post, remember? I immediately booked a ticket to a city when I know you're here. Send me your address. I will be there soon." I sent my address to Macy after the phone call. There were some unread texts, too. Scrolling down, some of them were from Stacy, reporting work stuff. There were also a few texts from Jared. I nearly forgot about Jared. He had told me earlier he'd be in a city, too. Hence, I called him at once. My call got through almost instantly. "Where are you?" Jared asked in his deep voice. "You're in a city, too. What a coincidence. I have just arrived. I was about to call you, but you beat me to it. Which hotel are you at?" His voice was low, but his surroundings were noisy. My voice grew louder. "Wyndham Hotel on South Fold Street." "Okay, see you later." I hung up and prepared to take a shower. We were going to dinner later, so I knew Macy would ask me to go shopping with her. It was nice to walk around. After all, I hadn't done that in a while. I wanted to return to the other room to take a shower, but I couldn't find the other room card anywhere. Since Nick was asleep, I didn't wake him up and took a shower right in this room. It should be fine. I was not going to shower in front of him, anyway. I felt really sticky all over. After taking a shower, I felt so much better. I blow-dried my hair, changed into a new outfit, and put on light makeup. When I emerged from the bathroom, Nick was talking to someone on the phone. "Hello. Who is this?" he uttered sleepily. The person on the other end of the phone said something. So he replied, "She's taking a shower. You can call her later." He ended the conversation with a murmur and hung up. Exiting the bathroom, I saw him lounging on the sofa lazily. He yawned after seeing me. "Why are you all dressed up?" "It's just dinner." Elle ignored him and noticed he was holding my phone. Recalling the conversation he had earlier, I realized he had answered my phone. Shocked, I questioned, "Did you answer a call meant for me?" He nodded and straightened his back. Flinging my phone to me, he replied, "It kept ringing and woke me up." I caught my phone and went through the call records. The last call was from Ashton. When I tried to call Ashton, his phone was switched off. Glaring at Nick in frustration, I asked, "What did you say to him?" He rose to his feet casually. "Nothing. Ashton asked me where you are, and I told him you were in the shower. Then he asked if I was in the same room with you." I replied in the affirmative, "Of course." Giving me an innocent look, he quipped, "I was telling the truth. I did nothing wrong, did I?" All Elle wanted to do was to beat him up. "Yes, you're right," I replied sarcastically. His words were very misleading. I tried calling again to no avail. But then again, I didn't think Ashton would be that petty. By the time I gave up and pocketed my phone, Nick had just come out of the bathroom. His hair was wet. He must have washed his face back there. Drying his hair with a towel, he said, "Come on, let's go. It's getting late." As we walked out of the hotel, I texted Macy and Jared. Macy had just arrived at the hotel, so she told me she'd take a nap first and come later. Jared informed me he had something on for now. I replied to their texts briefly and went to the restaurant Howard had reserved. Howard was an efficient man. When Nick and Elle arrived, the others were already waiting for us. In the VIP room, Howard introduced us to everyone and made some small talk. The others were all higher-ups from the branch office. Nick chatted with them casually before delving into work-related matters. They were conversing pleasantly when I left, but there was a slight change in their tones when I returned. Nick said to Howard, "Mr. Wrangler, you're a shareholder of Fuller Corporation. It was listed 2 years ago and doing well currently. If someone embezzles a few million, it won't affect the company much. But if it happens frequently, one day, it might sink." The ship we're all on. Howard was confused. He raised his glass politely. "Mr. Harrison, you are young and capable. I don't understand what you mean by that. Then read your financial reports closely." Nick raised his glass, too. "Cheers." Before I could reply, he had downed his drink. He took my glass and added, "I know you can't drink. Let me drink on your behalf." The other higher-ups were scowling at Nick's words. The manager of the finance department spoke. "Mr. Harrison, cheers. Thank you for auditing the branch office personally." The other higher-ups came to toast with Nick one after another, and soon enough, Nick got drunk. At the end of dinner, I struggled to bring Nick into a cab. I had a splitting headache by then. Why was he so fond of drinking when he was not good at it? Macy's call arrived. When I answered, she asked cheerily, "Where are you? Come, let's go shopping." I looked at the unconscious drunkard beside me and sighed, "I have to take care of a drunkard. Can't come now. Damn it." Macy cursed. "This is no fun." Staring at Nick, I resisted the urge to pinch him as I replied, "I will still be here tomorrow. If possible, I will finish work in the morning. We can go shopping after that." "Fine. Tomorrow, then." Macy replied and hung up at once. Our cab rolled to a stop in front of the hotel. I paid the fare and got out with Nick. Glancing at the stairs in front of us, I couldn't help but sigh in exasperation. What a strange five-star hotel. Was there a need to build these stairs right at the entrance? Complaining silently, I helped Nick up the stairs slowly. Luckily, it wasn't tiring at all as I was wearing flats. Halfway there, my phone started ringing. I put a hand into my bag to grab it, but Nick's hand snaked around my waist. Elle instinctively shoved him away. Alas, I forgot we were climbing the stairs. Nick promptly tumbled down the stairs. I froze in my tracks, utterly dumbfounded. It wasn't until the security came to help him up that I snapped back to my senses. Hurry, send him to the hospital. Hopefully, he did not hurt himself. With the security's help, Nick and Elle arrived at the hospital smoothly. After running the necessary checks, the doctor confirmed Nick had only sustained injuries to his head. He had to be hospitalized for a few days. After all the hassle, Nick was still unconscious. The doctor couldn't be sure what went wrong, so he told me he'd be back tomorrow morning when Nick regained consciousness. Nick's wound had been bandaged. The doctor said someone had to stay with him, so I remained there. When Macy called again, it was dawn. I was nodding off on the bench outside Nick's ward. Scarlett, let's go shopping, Macy declared once I picked up. I knew at once she was tipsy. It was already dawn, so I yawned and sat up. Macy, where are you? Did she drink alone again? Stovall Avenue. Come, let's go shopping together, she announced drunkenly. I couldn't help but worry as she was drinking alone in a foreign city. As Nick was still hooked on an IV drip, I couldn't leave right now. I thought about it and consoled Macy over the phone. After cutting the line, I called Jared. Hello. Jared answered sleepily. I seemed to have woken him up from his sleep. Feeling apologetic, I inquired, Dr. Crest, can you do me a favor? My friend is on Stovall Avenue. I think she's intoxicated. Can you help me pick her up? I'm currently busy. After a brief pause, Jared responded, sure. Send me her number. I'll be there in a while. Sighing in relief, I proceeded to thank him profusely. I immediately sent Macy's phone number to him. After all the hassle, I made myself comfortable on the bench and fell asleep promptly. The next day, when Nick woke up, he asked me why I'm in the hospital. I smiled awkwardly. You drank too much last night and fell down the stairs. I brought you to the hospital after that. Frowning, he asked, I fell down myself. I nodded guiltily. Suddenly, he broke into a grin. Scarlett, I remembered it was you who shoved me down the stairs. Why are you feeling guilty, huh? I couldn't talk back to him. Why did you get drunk in the first place? Glaring at him, Elle added, use your brain. If you're fine, we can go back now. Our business trip was a short one to begin with. As he was in the hospital, our work had to be delayed. The doctor examined again and announced he was fine. He could leave right after changing the dressing. After his discharge, he shamelessly insisted I had to take responsibility for what I have done to him. I had no time for his antics. We went to the office and showed Howard the evidence about the embezzlement. Howard was shocked to hear the news. He hastily ordered a thorough investigation of the finance department and other relevant departments. It wasn't a huge issue. After Nick prepared the final statement, I scanned through the overall operation of the branch office and listened to some reports. As there were no other problems, we ended our business trip. We were supposed to go back to J City, but Nick insisted we should eat something good before returning. So, we ended up at the biggest food hall in a city. I called Macy to invite her out. She only picked up after several rings. Hello, she uttered sleepily. How could she still be asleep at this hour? Are you awake? Wake up. I'm at the food hall now. Macy replied. You go ahead. I will be there soon. I was about to hang up when a man spoke. You're awake. Damn it. Did she get herself a man last night? I thought she was wasted. Ms. Markle, pray tell. What's going on? I couldn't stop myself from asking. Bye. Talk to you later. Macy cut the line abruptly. What was going on? Didn't I ask Jared to send her back last night? I couldn't believe she found herself a one-night stand in that circumstance. Wait, was that Jared? I proceeded to call Jared next. The phone rang for quite some time before someone picked up. Scarlett, he answered in a clear voice. It didn't seem like he was asleep, so Elle asked, What are you doing? I am driving. What's wrong? He replied. Well, it looked like he wasn't with Macy. Chuckling, I told him, I am done with work. Are you free this afternoon? Let's have lunch together. Sure, he agreed without hesitation. When I hung up, Nick was looking at me, amused. Scarlett, seriously, I shot him a puzzled look. What's wrong? He sighed. Is it that bad to spend some time alone with me? You keep calling your friends and inviting them here. How childish. I ignored his outburst and gazed at the bustling city. A city is developing swiftly. Gazing at International Trade Center located right in the bustling area, I told Nick, this is a tall building. He knew I was trying to change the topic and huffed. Fuller Corporation's building is taller than this. Plus, it houses different companies inside. Oh, you seem to know it well. I grew curious. He grunted and added, my mom bought this building with another tech company's owner. She has a company inside. So this building was owned by Cameron. I couldn't help but admire this capable woman. She was both wealthy and pretty. I recalled her saying she had another daughter when we were in Pear Garden. You have a sister? I asked Nick curiously. Nick seemed to hate this topic as his expression soured. That's her daughter. It has nothing to do with me. I stopped talking about it at once. Looking around, I noticed a store selling cream puffs on the first floor of International Trade Center. Suddenly, I had a craving for it. Turning to Nick, I suggested, why don't you wait for Jared and Macy in the mall? I'm going to buy something. I ran toward the cream puff store right after that. Both Macy and I loved eating cream puffs. We had similar tastes in food. After I ordered a few cream puffs, I stared into space blankly. My childhood memory was fuzzy by then, but I remembered how I loved eating cold and sweet stuff. 2 iced cream puffs, please. Suddenly, a deep male voice rang in my ear. It was so familiar and brought back some memories of the past. If the store owner hadn't hummed in acknowledgement, I would have thought I was dreaming. My reflexes always got the better of me. I didn't know when it started, but John had always terrified me. Once I sensed his presence, my skin would crawl. The sun was shining brightly, but a chill was running down my spine, seeping into my veins. I started panting and trembling in fear. Behind me, a man greeted me icily. Letty, long time no see. My body stiffened as I panted with difficulty. The cream puff store owner handed me my order, but I couldn't bring myself to take it. The man's hand reached out and took it. He pulled my hand naturally and placed the box in my hand. Letty, your reaction is really upsetting me, he uttered menacingly. It took me some time to calm down. I stepped away from him and choked out, I am sorry. You got the wrong person. With that, I fled the scene as fast as possible. It had been 5 years since I last met John. He had once said he wouldn't come looking for me on his own. However, our next meeting would be the beginning of his new scheme. I thought I wouldn't see him again after he left J City. After all, the world was huge. Never in a million years did I think we'd see each other again in a city. After escaping from John, I found Nick and Macy together. I stuffed the ruined cream puffs in her hands and pleaded in a trembling voice, "Macy, we need to return to J City now. Right now." Sensing my panic, Macy returned anxiously, "What's wrong?" "John Stovall. I saw him here." I mumbled fearfully. Macy slumped into her chair in shock. It took her some time to process that piece of information. "Let's head back to J City now," she urged. Nick didn't know what was going on. His brows knitted together as he asked, "What is it?" Macy took my hand, ready to leave. Nick tugged at my other hand in confusion. "Wait, what's going on? Stop dilly-dallying. We'll explain back in J City." Macy pried his hands off before we left the mall. We hailed a cab back to the hotel, packed up, and rushed to the airport at once. Macy and I held hands tightly during the 3-hour journey back to J City. After getting off the plane, we took a cab back to Glenwood Apartments. Back there, she proceeded to lock all the doors and windows before collapsing in a corner dejectedly. A heavy silence hung in the air. Finally, she met my gaze, her eyes red-rimmed. "Scarlett, what should we do?" I shook my head. The fear still lingered within me, and I was at my wits' end. "He might not know we're in J City. We might be safe here," she continued. The next minute, she shook her head and wept. "We can't hide from him. He's an IT expert. It's easy for him to find us." I stared at her wordlessly. We both knew John wouldn't let us off the hook easily this time. Back then, Macy and I had barely escaped from his clutches. If the same thing were to happen again, I wouldn't have the courage to save myself. "Get Ashton's help." Suddenly, Macy blurted out. "Scarlett, go to Ashton. He's capable enough to protect you. Plus, you're pregnant with his child. If you tell him everything, he'll make sure John stays away from you." Macy grew increasingly excited and took my hand to leave her house. I stopped her, my heart sinking. "Macy, calm down first. Let's think of something after we calm down, all right?" Macy shook her head and bit her lip fearfully. In the end, she burst out in tears and wrapped her arms around me tightly. "How can Elle calm down? I've already forgotten about the nightmares after 5 long years. Why did he show up? Why?" With Macy in my embrace, my heart was aching in sorrow. I had the same thought too, we wouldn't meet him again ever. That night, Macy and I barely slept through the night. We kept jolting awake from the horrible nightmares. Macy finally fell asleep at dawn. I couldn't sleep, so I returned to the villa when the sun came up. Macy was right. Ashton might be of help. Nevertheless, I didn't expect to be locked out of the villa. Previously, Ashton and I recorded our fingerprints so both of us could unlock the door at Peakville Estate. This time, I tried a few times but failed to unlock the door. It took me a while to realize the lock had been changed. I tried to call Ashton, but his line was busy. Obviously, he had blocked my number. I didn't know what was going on, so I went to the company instead. It was still early, so the building was practically empty. The executives in the finance department used to welcome me warmly, but today they kept whispering behind my back. My brows snapped together. I didn't know what was going on, so I entered my office first. Stacy hadn't arrived yet. I browsed through the files on my desk and signed every document that needed my signature. An hour later, Stacy arrived. She was taken aback when she saw me at my desk. Nevertheless, she greeted me with a polite smile. Something was amiss. She took the files I signed and was about to leave. Sensing her hesitation, I asked, "Is something wrong?" Her expression turned awkward. "Miss Stovall, are you seriously going out with Mr. Harrison?" I didn't know what she was talking about. "Which Mr. Harrison?" "Nick Harrison." She looked at me curiously. "The news about you and Mr. Harrison had been circulating around for days. Last night, someone exposed a video of you entering the same hotel room with Mr. Harrison at A City. But Miss Stovall, you've just suffered from a miscarriage. Plus, you're still married to Mr. Fuller. Why did you?" She trailed off. I was still confused. "What happened these few days?" She took out her phone and showed me the front page news. I read carefully through the news. It started 2 days ago when Nick brought me to the city center for dinner in his flashy Maybach. Netizens started making up stories that got more malicious. In the end, I became a slut. After reading the article, my head began throbbing in pain. So that was why those people from the finance department were staring at me strangely. Was that why Ashton changed the lock of the villa and blocked my number? When I recalled how Nick answered the call from him at the hotel, my headache intensified. Why did everything come down on me, all at once? My phone started buzzing. Seeing I was busy, Stacy left with the files. I glanced at the caller ID. It was Nick. Feeling annoyed, I answered his call. "What is it? Did you see the headlines?" He asked casually. I mumbled in response. "Yes, I did.